Hello and thanks for joining us. My name is Amanda Morley, and in today's podcast we are discussing assisted suicide. Joining me is Dr. Kevin Ewell, our BA History Programme Leader here at the University of Sunderland. It's lovely to have you here, Kevin.
Thank you very much for having me.
Assisted suicide, it's such an emotive topic, and it's not something that I have discussed with my friends or family. I know it's in the media at the moment, and this is why we're here discussing it. So Kevin, what do you want to say about the topic?
Well, first of all, just to say how I got into it as a historian, because some people will be wondering, why is a historian
it's quite different. Yeah,
it is. It's very different, but it arises originally from, I did research on the 1960s and 1970s. And what I noticed was that the social movements of the 1970s were entirely different than the social movements of the 1960s. So, for instance, another interest of mine, as it happens, is gun control, whereby conservatives were for gun control in the past and radicals were against gun control. Mm-hmm. So you had the Black Panthers, for instance, and that changed 180 degrees. And what I noticed with assisted suicide was that the Voluntary Euthanasia Society of America could not keep an office open in 1960, 9 to 5, throughout the entire country. And they were multi-million-dollar with multitudes of full-time employees within 15 years. And I wanted to understand why that was, why it had taken off as an issue. So that's how I got into it. But history is an interesting way of looking at it because, of course, you can look at the 1890s when people considered suicide. They were quite open about suicide and thought that they were fairly permissive. So they said, we think it's all right for a man to take himself off if he's dying of cancer. But what they never mentioned was assistance. And so I thought that was also very, very interesting. Why is it now that people want to be assisted to die rather than just have the right to suicide? So that's how I got into it.
Right. Well, it's in the media at the moment. And I know there's a certain individual that we've spoken about in the past. Would you like to give our listeners some more information on that person? And why?
Noel Conway?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah.
Noel Conway is in the news right at the moment, yes, because he's seeking the right to die. In 2015, you had a very decisive vote in Parliament against legalising assisted suicide. It was, I believe, I can't remember the exact number of votes, but it was certainly something 300 something to 200. So it was absolutely categorical. But immediately, the main organisation who is in favour of the right to die, which is Dignity in Dying, decided to make a legal case, and they used this particular gentleman who has motor neuron disease. It's a terrible disease, and of course everybody feels for him. But there are 1,000 people in Britain right now with motor neuron disease, and nobody else is asking for the right to die. So it is a very specific case, and they are prosecuting it for very specific reasons. His case is that he should have a right outside of, beyond the parliamentary scrutiny in the sense that the Parliament passed the law against it. He thinks his human rights are being breached, and so he's appealing as we speak in court. In fact, I just got an email about it from somebody, and literally the court is sitting today. So he's appealing on that basis, and my organisation, I'm a sort of honorary member of Not Dead Yet, which is a disabled organisation of people who are very concerned about assisted suicide because they feel that if people are being granted assisted suicides for physical criteria, then it's not going to be that much further until we go down the road, until we get to, for instance, what's happening in the Netherlands, whereby you have people who are tired of life, or people who have had, who are physically disabled, and if they've appealed successfully for assisted suicides, and so they're very concerned, and so we have hired lawyers through Not Dead Yet, but also there are Christian groups who are also very concerned about it as well.
It is a hard topic to discuss. I've recently read an article, and it was regarding a husband and wife, and they'd been married for about 60 years, but they were coming to their end of life. Looking at them physically, they looked fine, but they had agreed to die comfortably and together in a hotel room with their family around them. They had a meal beforehand. And actually, if I was put in that position where, I think just going back to the story, the wife maybe, I'm sure she was diagnosed with dementia. So that disease, as I think a lot of people are being affected by it, at the end of the point where you forget who your family, who your friends are, you can't feed yourself in some cases. Would assisted suicide then not be seen as humane? Especially for this couple who they want to die together, they want to die knowing that the other person doesn't have to live without their partner who they've been together for 60 years. In that case, I think assisted suicide would be a positive for them, because then their family's not seeing them going through the whole dementia issues. They're not having to live with that. They don't feel that they're then a burden to their family. What's your thoughts on that particular case, when somebody has their right mind and is making that decision for themselves?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, on individual cases, it's very, very difficult to make a law based on an individual case like that. That might be an exceptional one. I mean, I don't know the particular couple that you're talking about, and I wouldn't want to tell people what to do. I would say, first of all, nobody would be prosecuted in that instance. Mm-hmm. And so the suicide law has been used for prosecution about 5 times, and none of them successfully, as far as I can find out. So I would say, whatever the circumstances are in that situation, I wouldn't be in favour of changing the law. Mm-hmm. Obviously, people should be allowed, anybody who's a free, intelligent, competent adult, I guess is the way to put it. A competent adult should be free to take their lives. We don't take people's shoelaces and belts from free people. You do that to prisoners and slaves, and I think people should be free to take their own lives. My objection is really to the assistance. Why do you treat that as medical treatment? It's, death is not a medical problem. It's not a treatment. Death is a great cure for a headache. It is very final, but it's not appropriate treatment for a doctor to give. So my problem is having doctors involved in the entire process. If the family did that and nobody reported them, I don't think there would be a massive problem. On the other hand, looking at that, I think it's a very romantic thing that people who are our age might look at and think, oh, wouldn't that be lovely? And we might change our tune. Never forget that 90 looks too old, except to an 89-year-old. And, you would also, I think there's also a problem in the dementia issue, because a lot of dementia patients are put to death in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And there are horrendous cases whereby there was one situation where a demented patient did not take the drugs that would knock her out, and she had to get the family holding her down so the doctor could give her a shot to kill her.
Oh gosh.
And I don't think that would leave good memories, and I can't see that, if you are forced to kill a demented person, I wouldn't do it. I don't know whether you would do it, but it seems something going too far to ask. And the problem for a demented person is they are not competent to kill themselves. So what do? Would you kill them?
Goodness.
It's a difficult question.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. So this lady who was pinned down and injected, did the family had signed a contract for that to happen on her behalf? And
she had signed an agreement.
She had signed that agreement.
She had signed that agreement when she was competent. She did not want to live. But as a demented person, she did not have the competence to make that decision. So they had to force that decision on her against her will. And I'm a little bit disturbed by the prospect of us killing people against their will. Not just a little bit, actually, quite a bit disturbed by the prospect of killing someone. So do you have the same
thoughts on those who are serving life sentences in America for murder, for example?
I'm opposed to capital punishment almost for the same reasons. I don't think it's right for, even though these are the worst scum of the earth people who have ever lived, and if they died tomorrow, I wouldn't be sad. I think it's wrong for us to kill them. I think it's the moral wrong in killing that is the aspect of assisted suicide that disturbs me most. And that's why I think it's a moral precipice, not a slippery slope. because once you can't just say, oh, well, we'll have capital punishment for some people, just the really nasty ones. It doesn't work that way. It's a principle that you are taking the life of a person unnecessarily. If it's in self-defense, then it's a necessary taking of life. If it's in a situation whereby somebody is in pain and you give too much opiates, for instance, that's a necessary act of giving just to kill the pain, and it ends up killing the patient as well. But executing somebody, I think, is the wrong aspect, because it's killing somebody unnecessarily. It's taking a life, which I think should be wrong. We have in our murder laws, I wouldn't get punished more for taking the life of a 24-year-old than I would for taking the life of a 104-year-old. There would both be wicked acts. And I think that's the case. And, in our murder laws, we see a moral equality to individuals. And I think that's what we're in danger of losing.
So you mentioned before the Netherlands
Yes.
have legalised. Are there any other countries who have legalised this sort of?
Yes, there are. The Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. It's complicated because in the Netherlands, both assisted suicide and euthanasia. Euthanasia is when the doctor does the final act. Assisted suicide is when you do the final act as the patient. Both of those are legal. Interestingly, euthanasias are way up, and assisted suicide is not gone up at all. In fact, just drags along the bottom. There are few of those. In Belgium, just euthanasia, but it's always described as voluntary. In Switzerland, suicide is legal, and therefore assisting a suicide, so long as it's not done for reasons of money. So as long as it's done for good reasons, that's legal. That's why you have the suicide clinics open there. Luxembourg has the same basic law as Belgium. You also have Venezuela or Colombia. Sorry, I might be getting those two wrong. One of those two countries has legalized it, and it's also legal in 7 jurisdictions in the United States and in Victoria in Australia. So those are the places where it's legal, but it is in Oregon, where it's lasted the longest in the United States. It's all assisted suicide. In fact, the doctor does not need to be in the room. They just leave you with the drugs. So that's completely different than the way it is in the Netherlands and in Belgium, where the doctor always performs the act.
I was reading something about Guernsey. They've recently been in the news as well, haven't they?
They have been, and that's because they were trying to put it through. Luckily, myself and others were flown over there, and we gave talks and that sort of thing. And I think we convinced the deputies over there to not enact the request.
So what triggered that then? Was there a trigger to them
Yes,
requesting
there's the chief deputy, I can't remember what they're called. It's not a prime minister, but it's the head deputy of the Parliament, of Guernsey Parliament, had put forward a proposal to legalise assisted suicide. And he had a father who died fairly painfully. So
right, so he'd used his experience. Do you think that was
this
the
is
case?
Normally there are only 2 arguments for assisted suicide that I can work out. One is, how can you let somebody die in pain? So it normally starts with a very disturbing, nasty story of somebody dying in a terrible situation. And the second one is, you're a bunch of Christians and you're trying to tell us what to do and what not to do. Why not? And those are the only 2 arguments that I can see that they really have. But when you complexify the whole issue, as what we went over to do, then it makes people think a little bit harder about what they're actually doing. And so we managed to do that, and it was defeated very soundly in Guernsey, which was a good thing, because otherwise it could have, they left it open-ended enough, it could have ended up as Switzerland, where people would fly to take their lives.
So do you think in the future there's going to be a likelihood of having cases like this in the UK?
They will try again, because, you do feel fighting against it. It's like the little boy with the dike and putting his fingers in wherever the water leaks out. You feel like you're continually sort of, or one of those
Yeah.
things where the hammers come up and you have to hammer them down, and that's what we feel like. There's the Noel Conway case. There's another case which is interesting because the person isn't terminally ill, and his name is Omid, and he argues, well, I'm going to suffer for longer than a terminally ill person, so why shouldn't I have that?
And what does Omid have then that's causing him
He's
so much
got
pain?
a paralysis, I don't know the specific disease, but he has a paralysis of the arms, and I think it's slowly he will become more and more paralyzed. So it's a horrific disease. But as disabled people will tell you, you do adjust to these situations. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, I couldn't stand the indignity of having, not being able to go to the toilet unaided or something like that. And this is daily life for a lot of disabled people, and they feel that they lead very valuable lives. You will adjust to a situation like that. Even, in fact, the reason that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's the pioneering author of Death and Dying, is against assisted suicide is because she said, you go through the processes of death. So at first stage is denial, then anger, all of these, she's the one that came up with this schema. And she said, with an assisted suicide, you're just cutting off the end of somebody's life. You're actually robbing them of time that they might otherwise spend doing good or doing something. And it's part of the process where you adjust to whatever situation, and you enjoy the time left. And what she feels is these people who are wanting an assisted death have never got through the first phase of trying to stop it. Trying to kill yourself so you won't die. And she feels it's got some sort of psychological implications that way.
So you're obviously included or involved in an organisation that is predominantly getting out there to stop assisted suicides, is that right?
Yes, although I'm not disabled myself, and I cooperate with Christians, but I'm an atheist myself, so it puts me outside of both of these groups. But I'm more cooperative with I'm not more cooperative, I'm cooperative with everybody. But I am more a part of Not Dead Yet, simply because I've sort of been adopted as an honorary abled person against assisted suicide, and so I do a lot of work for them. The Christian groups have their own organizations, but campaign on slightly different basis as well.
Well, assisted suicide it's going to be one of those that's going to be debated for a long time.
Yes, I think so. It's interesting to look, because I'm a historian and I look at the turn of the century. There was another great interest over a period of about 30 years between, say, 1880s and 1914. And it was all from the perspective of eugenics in some ways, and that they thought it would be better for society to get rid of, as they termed them, imbeciles and worthless people who are just eating. Useless eaters was a term used during the Second World War. After that, particularly after the Nazis were making use of that whole idea of distinguishing human life of worth living and worthless, I think people will recognize in the past that this was a great mistake, and that to regard two human lives as unequal morally, to say to one group of the population, you know what, we're going to strenuously try and prevent your suicides, and to the other group of the population, we'll build a wheelchair ramp up to the proverbial cliff. If you want to jump off, we'll help you. I think that's morally unequal, and I think we'll look back and say that was wrong.
So, Kevin, you really have such a strong opinion about assisted suicide. Is there a reason behind that opinion of you being in a position yourself, personally, where maybe a loved one's gone through something drastic and terrible? And
well, I mean, you don't get to my hugely advanced age and not witness people dying. That's just part of the process of living, is that you will witness people dying. And I've witnessed good deaths and not so good deaths. But what really convinced me against this was when I was about 18, and I had a friend of mine who went to an American city and shot himself. And it was a horrific experience. And it's one of those things that, kind of makes you grow up.
It's a
very
life
quickly.
changer. It's
It
definitely a
is,
life changer.
and it was just something that my friends and I thought, oh, could we have prevented that? What was this all about? And I do remember one woman saying, well, I just think what he did was wrong. It was a bad act. He killed somebody who hurt, and she made the point that he was victim of it, but he was also the killer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you feel sorry for the victim, but you don't excuse the act of killing just for that. And she was saying, well, it's morally wrong. Look at his parents. And it was horrific what happened to his parents and his brothers and sisters. And it was a terrible situation. And so I just thought, yes, I think that act is wrong. And I don't think we can just turn around and say, oh, it's fine to kill yourself in any circumstance. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed logical. I mean, I like to think I'm actually open to persuasion if somebody comes up with a convincing argument. I'm not, I'm
so is
not
that an
close to
invite for
this.
somebody to maybe
I'm
come back on
perfectly happy for anybody
and
to
debate
come.
this? Yeah.
I have never turned down a debate on this topic, and I doubt I ever will. And I'm certainly not frightened. I've had some very good people debating on the other side. They're well motivated people,
Mm-hmm.
and I have respect for quite a few of them. But in the end, they cannot argue with a couple of things. The one strongest point is, where do you draw the line?
I think we'll end it there, Kevin. That's a good statement. You can find more of our podcasts on the University of Sunderland website, and if you do have any comments, please get in touch. And as Kevin's rightly said, he is happy to debate this as well.
Yes, so even if you're totally partisan and you want to ask questions or anything, I'm very open to this. And as I say, I'm open to convincing if somebody comes up with arguments for the other side that I can't deal with. But I've been doing this for a while now.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.